Hey everyone, in the lecture for today, I'm going to show you how to create a free survey using Google Forms, how to share your survey with participants, and how to analyze the results of your survey using Microsoft Excel. Let's get right to it. If you're interested in doing survey-based research, you may be interested in using a survey that's already been previously validated. For example, if you're interested in doing a survey on psychological well-being, you might use this previously validated survey by Butler and Kern 2016 called the PERMA Profiler. The PERMA Profiler aims to measure psychological well-being by providing a series of questions that measures each of the subcomponents of psychological well-being. Here we see that the components of psychological well-being include positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, PERMA. The PERMA Profiler provides a series of survey questions that measures each of these components of psychological well-being. On this page, we see a list of survey questions included in the PERMA Profiler. So if you wanted to do survey-based research on psychological well-being, you could use the list of questions provided on this sheet instead of making up questions on your own from scratch. The PERMA Profiler includes a list of survey questions where participants will have to provide an appropriate response using a scale from 0 to 10. For example, we see that the first question, labeled A1, states the following: how much of the time do you feel you are making progress towards accomplishing your goals? And the participant would have to provide a response using a scale from 0 for never to 10 for always. The next question, labeled E1, states the following: how often do you become absorbed in what you are doing? The next question, labeled P1, states the following: in general, how often do you feel joyful? This survey continues to provide questions where participants will have to provide an appropriate response using the scale from 0 to 10. One of my students in class is interested in whether the number of concussions an athlete has received throughout their lifetime is correlated with levels of depression and levels of happiness. So this lecture for today will focus on the example of creating surveys to investigate the possible relationship between concussions, depression, and happiness. To make this lecture clear and easy to follow, our survey today will only include 3 items based off of self-report. Including only 3 items will make things easy to follow when we do the statistical analysis using Microsoft Excel. In your own professional level research, you may consider including more items or drawing upon previously validated surveys, such as the PERMA Profiler or the Beck Depression Inventory. Okay, so now we want to create a survey that investigates the possible relationship between concussions and depression and happiness. Now, you have many options for how you can create and run your survey. For today, I'd like to show you how to use Google Forms to create a survey since Google Forms is free to use. In order to use Google Forms, you're going to have to create a free account on Google Workspace. So go ahead and create a free account on Google Workspace using your organization's email. Currently, the free version of Google Forms is only going to allow you to share your survey with other members of your organization. So if you're a student at a particular college and you want to share your survey with other students at your college, make sure to use your college's email address so that way you can share your survey with other students at your college. Once you've created an account on Google Workspace, go to your team dashboard and scroll down until you see this section right here for creating a form using Google Forms. Click on Create a Form. Once you click on Create a Form, you'll be directed to the screen where you can create a new form or select one of your previously created forms. For example, click on Blank, and you'll be directed to this new form where you can create a new survey. To change the title of your survey, just click in this box right here and type in the new name of your survey, such as concussions and depression. To add your first survey question, simply click down here and type in your question. For example, in general, how depressed are you? Now we see here on the right, we can select from short answer, multiple choice, but we're going to go ahead and use the linear scale. Here we see that this scale by default ranges from 1 to 5, but we can modify that if we'd like. For example, from 0 to 10. And here we see we have an option to include some helpful labels. For example, a helpful label next to 0 may be not at all depressed. And the helpful label next to 10 may be extremely depressed. When you're ready to add your next survey question, go ahead and click on this plus button right here for add a question. Now just continue to add your survey questions one at a time until you've included all your survey questions in this Google form. To help save time for this video, I've already completed a form for you. On this page, you can see that I've already created a survey for you entitled Concussions and Depression, which includes 3 items. The first item is the question, how many concussions have you had in your lifetime? And notice that the scale ranges from 1 concussion to 10 or more concussions. So your inclusion criteria for the survey may be athletes that have experienced at least 1 or more concussions. The second item includes the question, in general, how would you rate your level of depression? And the scale ranges from 1, not at all depressed, to 10, extremely depressed. And the final item in the survey includes the question, in general, how would you rate your level of happiness? And the scale ranges from 1, not at all happy, to 10, extremely happy. A hypothesis for this study might be that with an increasing number of concussions, we see an increasing level of depression and a decreasing level of happiness in participants. Once you've finished creating your survey and you're ready to share it with your participants, go ahead and click on the purple Send button in the top right corner. Once you click that purple Send button, you'll have some options for how to share the survey with your participants. If you want, you can send the survey directly to participants via email by including their email address in this box right here. Alternatively, you can share your survey via a link by clicking on this link button right here. If you want to shorten the link, go ahead and click on this shorten URL button right here. Now that you have a nice shortened link, you can go ahead and copy the link by clicking on the copy button. Now you can share that link via email or via social media or anywhere else where you can share a link. Importantly, before you share your survey and have participants complete your survey, make sure to get IRB approval first. Only after receiving IRB approval can you continue to do your research with your participants. Also, you'll want your participants to complete a consent form before they complete your survey. So after you receive IRB approval, create your survey using Google Forms and share your survey with your participants. Now you just have to wait for your participants to complete your survey so you can gather your results. To see the results of your survey, simply go back to this main page and notice that next to questions, you have another column entitled responses. And we can see here that 9 participants have already responded to this survey. If you click on responses, you can go ahead and see the responses from your participants. Here we have summary results. Here we have the individual questions. And here we have results for each individual. The individual results will be useful for us because we can plug these in to Microsoft Excel. For example, looking over here to this Microsoft Excel sheet, we see that I've already labeled the columns concussions, depression, and happiness. The results from participant 1 are included right here in row 2. Here we see survey responses for participant 1 of 9. For the question, how many concussions have you had in your lifetime? Participant 1 responded with 1 concussion. So I included 1 under the concussions column. For the next question, in general, how would you rate your level of depression? Participant 1 responded with 1, not at all depressed. So I included 1 in the depression column. For the third question, in general, how would you rate your level of happiness? Participant 1 responded with 9. And so I included 9 under the happiness column. So the responses from participant 1 are included here on row 2. And since there are only 3 questions, there are only 3 columns. After we've included all the relevant information for participant 1 on row 2, go ahead and click on the next button for participant 2's responses. The responses from participant 2 will go on row 3. And we see that participant 2 has provided the following responses for these 3 questions: 3, 6, 4. And we just include that here on row 3, 3, 6, 4. After we've included the relevant information for participant 2 on row 3, click the next button to move on to participant 3. And we'll go ahead and include the responses from participant 3 in row 4. We see over here that the responses from participant 3 are 1 to 8. So on row 4, we included 1 to 8 in the respective columns. After you've included the responses for participant 3 in row 4, click on the next button to move on to participant 4 and include these responses in row 5. And we see that the responses are 2, 5, 5. And in row 5, we have 2, 5, 5. Move on to participant 5. And we see that the responses from participant 5 are 4, 8, 2. So in row 6, we included 4, 8, 2. Moving on to participant 6, we see that their responses are 1, 1, 9. So on row 7, we include 1, 1, 9. Moving on to participant 7, their responses are 2, 4, 6. So in row 8, we have 2, 4, 6. Moving on to participant 8, their responses are 1, 1, 9. And we see in row 9, we've included 1, 1, 9. And finally, for participant 9, we see their responses are 5, 10, 1. And so here on row 10, we have 5, 10, 1. And just continue to do the same procedure for as many participants as you have. So if there was 20 or 30 participants, you just continue inputting all the relevant information for each participant row by row. And now that we've moved all of our relevant information from Google Forms into Microsoft Excel, for the rest of the lecture, we can focus on how to conduct a statistical analysis of our results using Microsoft Excel. So now that we've transferred the survey responses for each participant from Google Forms to Microsoft Excel, we see that we have the relevant information provided right here in columns A through C. Column A provides the number of concussions for each participant. Column B provides the depression ratings for each participant. And column C provides the happiness ratings for each participant. Now we want to see if there's a correlation between the number of concussions and depression ratings. We also want to see if there's a correlation between the number of concussions and happiness ratings. In this lecture, I'll show you 2 ways to determine the correlation between the number of concussions and depression ratings and the number of concussions and happiness ratings. I'll also show you how to produce a visualization of those results. In order to determine the correlation between the number of concussions and depression ratings, we can use the correlation function. To use the correlation function, press equals, type CORREL. For array 1, select column A1 through 10, comma. For array 2, select column B1 through 10, close parentheses, return. By looking at cells A32 and B32, we see that the correlation coefficient is 0.98, which is a strong correlation. A correlation coefficient of 1.0 would be a perfect positive correlation. A correlation coefficient of negative 1.0 would be a perfect negative correlation. So a correlation coefficient of 0.98 suggests that there's a strong positive correlation between the number of concussions and higher depression scores. Another way to determine the correlation between the number of concussions and depression is by producing this full table right here. To produce this full table, go up top to data, go over to data analysis, and click on regression. Okay. For the input Y range, select the concussions column, cell A1 through A10. For the input X range, select the depression column, cells B1 through B10. For the output range, select the cell where you'd like your table to be produced. As you can see, I've already selected cell A13 for my summary output, and then click OK. To determine the correlation coefficient, we want to look under regression statistics at multiple R. We see that multiple R gives us a correlation coefficient of 0.98, which is the same correlation coefficient that we arrived at using the correlation function. So the correlation coefficient represented by R tells us how strong the relationship is between two things, such as the number of concussions on the one hand and depression ratings on the other. Now, whereas R tells us that we found a strong positive correlation between an increased number of concussions and higher depression scores, our p-value will tell us if our findings are statistically significant or not. A common p-value for statistical significance in psychology is p less than 0.05. So we're using 0.05 as a cutoff point to determine if our results are statistically significant or not. So is our finding of a strong positive correlation between the number of concussions and depression scores statistically significant? Cell E30 shows us our p-value, and we see that the p-value is well below p less than 0.05, showing us that our results are not due to chance, but are statistically significant. Cell E30 provides the p-value in scientific notation, so I've provided a translation of the scientific notation for you in cell E32. Now that we've determined the R value and p-value for concussions and depression, we just need to reiterate the same procedure for concussions and happiness. To determine if there's a correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores, select the cell, press equals, and type CORREL. For array 1, select the concussions column, cell A1 through A10, comma. For array 2, select the happiness column, so cells C1 through C10, close parentheses, return. A correlation coefficient of negative 0.97 suggests that there's a strong negative correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores. A correlation coefficient of negative 0.97 suggests that there's a strong negative correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores. Another way to calculate the correlation coefficient along with the p-value is by going up top, selecting data, then going over to data analysis. Select regression and click OK. For the input Y range, Select the concussions column, and we see that that's already been selected, cells A1 through A10. For the input X range, we want to select the happiness column this time. So we'll clear this X range and replace it with cells C1 through C10. Our output range, we want to pick a free cell. And you see I've already selected cell A35 for this. Next, click OK. After you click OK, your table will be provided below. By looking at multiple R underneath regression statistics, we see that there's a strong correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores. By checking our multiple R with our correlation function, we see that that strong relationship between concussions and happiness scores is a negative correlation rather than a positive correlation. So now that we found a strong negative correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores, is this finding statistically significant? To answer that question, we have to look at the p-value, which is provided in cell E52. Since cell E52 provides the p-value in scientific notation, I've provided a translation of this for you in cell E54. Here we see that the p-value is well below the cutoff of p less than 0.05, suggesting that our results are not due to chance, but are statistically significant. So, first, we found that there was a strong positive correlation between the number of concussions and depression scores, and that this finding was statistically significant. Next, we found that there's a strong negative correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores, and that finding was statistically significant. So now that we've calculated R values and P values for concussions and depression on the one hand, and concussions and happiness on the other, let's go ahead and produce some visualizations to help others understand our results. So what we want to do now is produce figures like this. The figure on the left shows us the relationship between concussions and depression. On the x-axis, we have the number of concussions. On the y-axis, we have depression scores. And we see that there's a strong positive relationship between the number of concussions and depression scores, since the higher the number of concussions, the higher the depression scores. The figure on the right shows us the relationship between concussions and happiness. On the x-axis, we have the number of concussions, and on the y-axis, we have happiness scores. And we see that there's a strong negative correlation between concussions and happiness, because the higher the number of concussions, the lower the happiness scores. Now, to produce these two figures, go ahead and highlight all the data in columns A, B, and C. Click on Home, then click on Analyze Data, and these two figures will be automatically produced for you. The top figure shows the relationship between concussions and depression, and you can insert this figure by clicking on Insert Chart. The bottom figure shows the relationship between concussions and happiness, and to insert this figure, click on Insert Chart. So now you have the R value, P value, and visualization for the relationship between concussions and depression. You also have the R value, P value, and a visualization for the relationship between concussions and happiness. This helps us answer our original research question of whether there was a relationship between concussions and depression or concussions and happiness. And now we can write up our results and include tables and visualizations for our presentations and research articles. Remember, one of our research questions was whether there was a correlation between the number of concussions and depression scores. And we saw that the correlation coefficient for concussions and depression was 0.98. Looking at this table, we see that 0.98 is a strong correlation. And since the p-value for this finding was below the cutoff of p less than 0.05, we know that this finding is not due to chance and is statistically significant. Remember that our other research question was whether there was a correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores. And we saw that the correlation coefficient for concussions and happiness was negative 0.97. Looking at this table, we see that negative 0.97 is a strong negative correlation. So we found that there was a strong negative correlation between the number of concussions and happiness scores. Since the p-value for this finding was well below the cutoff of p less than 0.05, we know that this result is not due to chance, but is statistically significant. Finally, we produced visualizations of our results so that our results are easy for others to understand. I've provided a copy of this Excel sheet for you at the link below and in the file section of the course. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and found it helpful. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope you have a great day.